Today, I would like to discuss the current crisis in Turkey and its potential impact on European banks. The partial solar eclipse on August 11th at 18 Leo made a direct conjunct hit to the Turkish Neptune based on the proclamation of the Turkish Republic horoscope. 20th century astrologer Charles James said that Neptune, when energized by an eclipse in a national horoscope, was most frequently involved in the downfall of a government because of a lack of clarity and direction in leadership, unsound fiscal policies resulting in inflation of the currency, distorted markets fueled by bubbles, and the inability to service or repay debt that could result in a chain reaction of defaults. The horoscope you see here in the wheel is for October 23rd, 1923 at 8:30 p.m. in Ankara, Turkey, based on the proclamation of the Republic that took place in the National Assembly in Ankara, and is for that of the horoscope of modern Turkey. Now, what's interesting here is that during the lead up to the August 11th solar eclipse, Turkey had been experiencing major instability in its currency, with panic spreading throughout the global markets after the Turkish lira plummeted shortly after the Trump administration announced its plan to double tariffs on Turkey's aluminum and steel imports. And we can see that very clearly here in the graph. Now, as of this writing on August 18th, 2018, and when I am stating now on August 22nd, Turkey has a 15% inflation rate and a cratering of its currency due to the crisis. The correlation of Turkey's crisis with the recent solar eclipse augurs that the Turkish currency crisis could create a larger crisis greater than what we saw back in 2015 with Greece. Now, Turkey boasts the 14th largest economy that has been funded globally by globally held debt because they had easy access to global debt markets, borrowing a lot of money in US dollars after the Federal Reserve initiated its zero interest rate policy during the 2008 financial crisis. Turkey borrowed so much money that its current foreign currency debt stands at more than 50%, meaning that most of its economic growth over the past 9 years was funded by debt creation. If that debt were issued in terms of lira, Turkish lira, there would be no crisis, for it could easily pay off it with cheaper lira. Unfortunately, roughly 450 billion of that debt was issued in terms of other fiat currencies, with US dollar denominated bonds making up a full third of that debt. European banks with exposure to Turkey, along with US banks connected to those European banks, could encounter serious headwinds. If the lira continues to devalue, that external debt becomes impossible to repay. And if Turkey defaults on that debt, then foreign banks, such as Spanish banks, French banks, and Italian banks, are vulnerable to a liquidity crisis, possibly resulting in a systemic banking crisis that can spread throughout the Eurozone. European bank stocks have just entered a bear market, and investors' fears that a Turkish currency crisis will transition into a full-blown debt crisis is now on the horizon. It is necessary to note that over 50 billion in euro credit assets are tied into credit derivatives that are connected directly with Deutsche Bank, a universal global bank that has recently been downgraded and considered insolvent. As you can see, that Deutsche Bank, as of today, is on the same trajectory path that Lehman was this time back in 2008. And if Turkey were to default on its debt because the global financial system is incestuously intertwined, it could trigger a credit crisis among emerging markets throughout the globe that would likely invoke credit default swaps that are tied directly to major world banks in Europe, resulting in a contagion that could threaten the entire global banking system. Now, this is serious and has become serious. The eclipse hit to Turkey's chart augurs the emergence of a severe debt crisis in the coming weeks ahead that will force Turkey to implement capital controls and request an IMF bailout, something President Erdogan will try everything in his power to prevent from happening, as it would be a major political loss for him. Soon, Turkey's central banks will have no choice but to raise rates to defend its currency, placing the government and the economy in a very difficult position. Therefore, the IMF and global banks along with Wall Street, will be closely watching if the Turkish banks and major corporations, not to mention the government, will be able to maintain access to foreign funding that they need, not only to keep the economy humming along, but being able to service mature debts when those debts become due, especially in December. The alternative for Turkey would mean massive defaults for companies that make up a core of the Turkish economy. Now, it's important to note that the problem is not just with Turkey. According to world-class financial forecaster Martin Armstrong, who stated that after Italy's warning that the European Central Bank has to keep quantitative easing going or else the entire bond market will collapse, forcing Italy to exit the EU and resulting in the breakup of the entire Eurozone. This revelation has finally made investors realize that Mario Draghi of the European Central Bank has indeed destroyed the European economy and its bond market. Since earlier this summer, Armstrong has warned that we are entering a crisis phase, and he stated that many of our worst nightmares are coming alive, and far too many people in government are still refusing to face reality. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to hear for your comments and input and commentary in the future. I'll certainly be talking about the escalating emerging market crisis in regards to Brazil, in regards to Argentina and other nations. And I will also talk in more detail about the major crisis that is emerging now with the central banking systems worldwide that are systemically tied into each other, especially in regards to Deutsche Bank. Thank you.